Welcome to Turning Pages, a series of in-depth conversations with authors about their works.
All right, well, Hang Time, a great collection of stories from Brendan Gillen, out now. He joins me on the program to discuss it. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Michael, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. So I have to ask, and I interview a lot of artists about albums and stuff, and sometimes there's the title track. And so obviously there's a story called Hang Time. Was Hang Time the first story, or what was kind of the beginnings of this collection?
Yeah, good question. The first story actually was a piece called Tully, which is sort of um, a weird first person story from the perspective of an aging boxer, and that one was from back in like 2018, I want to say. I don't think I had necessarily set out to create this collection of sports themed fiction per se. They just kind of assembled themselves, if that makes sense. I just, sports. I grew up in a sports family and have been, I was an athlete growing up and just a long time sports fan. So sports kind of weaves its way into my work, and over time, I guess over the course of the last 6 7 years, just amassed a folder of sports adjacent stories, and that's sort of how it went. So I guess it wasn't necessarily planned from the get go, but they kind of fell together, I guess.
So there are non-sports related stories in your folders
It,
and in your work.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. I wouldn't say that I'm explicitly a sports fiction writer, but and I would say that Scott and the 406 team who put the book out were gave me a little bit of a leash. Some of the stories are tangential to sports, but sports is definitely the beating heart of the collection. And yeah, the title story, Hang Time, is sort of the centerpiece, and revolves around a basketball player, which was sort of my love growing up. But yeah, sports are definitely, if not the heart, then they shade around the edges and hopefully provide a through line.
So playing basketball growing up, were you on the bench or are you a starter?
I've done both. I think I was a guy who could shoot some threes. I'm 6 foot, can't really jump, but I could shoot. So played through high school and started a couple years and first freshman sophomore came off the bench. So I've sort of done it all. I've seen both sides.
Yeah, just because I ask is obviously storytelling on the bench. Sometimes there's times when the mind wanders.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, you're wondering, A, am I going to get in the game? B, I wonder what's going to be for dinner. C, I probably should study for that chemistry exam tomorrow. So yeah, you definitely are. You want to say that you're dialed in, but until you're on the floor, you can space out a little bit.
Yeah, and I'm just curious because sometimes, and obviously, I've read books by relief pitchers who have a lot of time, between times
Yeah.
they're called in for service, and if you're on the bench, is there any route to creativity and storytelling that comes from being adjacent to the action but not directly in it?
Wow, that's a fantastic question. Yeah, I mean, I would have to say that that's true. I mean, I think if you're on the floor or on the field, the pitch, whatever it might be, you don't really have the space or time to think much beyond the play that's right in front of you. Whereas if you're on the bench, you can kind of you're ruminating a little bit. You're thinking about your storytelling in the sense that you're sort of planning one step ahead. If I do get in, how am I going to impact the game? So there's a natural storytelling element that goes in there. But then there's also, like you said, the relief pitchers who or even starters who pitch once every 3 4 5 days, and you spend a lot of time hanging out, chewing gum, shooting the shit with your teammates. So um, yeah, I would say that stories must emerge, and you're probably seeing things from a different angle, maybe one that's a little bit askew.
Yeah. So the sports stories, when did you notice you were starting to write sports stories?
Well, I think I always wanted to explore my fanhood in my fiction. But I found that if I tried to force a story, it wouldn't be as natural or wouldn't feel, it just wouldn't come out right. So in some sense, you have to be patient. It's like, waiting for the ball to come to you if you're playing basketball, or, it's like they say, don't try to let the game come to you, to use a sports cliche or a coaching cliche. I think if you just kind of let things ruminate in the subconscious, and, I'm thinking about sports. I grew up, a 90s sports fan. So those names, the Penny Hardaways, the Sean Kemps, the Ricky Hendersons, are part of my DNA, so to speak, my sports DNA, my cultural intake. Playing video games, collecting cards, all those things that you do when you're, that sort of the ripe age when sports fandom really, really touches you. So it's always been there. I think I just had to be patient and let things emerge, and try to not force it. So I think I didn't really plan, although I always hoped that I could kind of weave sports into my writing.
The sports cards thing, I didn't even know you were going to talk about it, but I do, like, I have like this notion that there's people who, read the liner notes, or, stay for the credits, or read the backs of the baseball cards. Were you like the
Yeah.
kind of kid who read the backs?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love those snippets. And I think whether it was like the stats themselves or just like the little bios, that's what you're pouring over. Back then, the internet was really nascent. I'm 12 years old in 1995, call it. You got your Beckett magazines to check the value of whatever card that you got, that you dialed in on the pack that you opened up. And you had your Beckett's, you had your Sports Illustrateds, you had the back of baseball cards, and that's really what you had. And I was cutting out, uh, the um, the standings from the paper every day, the box scores. So that's what we had. You know what I mean? Like that was our ephemera. That was our internet, before we had all the sports almanacs and all these references right at our fingertips, and any data or stat you could ever possibly imagine. So yeah, of course, you had to, you were kind of taking everything in you possibly could.
And from that, you're kind of extrapolating or trying to kind of build out a world
Yeah.
in of the sport, right? And I do wonder if like some of your creativity kind of springs from that era of like seeing the game in a different way because you didn't have all of the highlights or all of the story.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, you had to kind of envision some things for yourself. And I think just the mass media television, just watching, NBA inside stuff on Saturday mornings, and playing NBA Jam, and seeing these cross collaborations. Like I just dug up a photo of Sean Kemp and Jeff Ament from Pearl Jam doing like a cross promo for a poster that went out in, like, early '90s. So all these things just kind of made their way into they just were part of who you, as a sports fan, you were just consuming all these things. And so I think in a strange way, like that's just kind of the gumbo that, the source material that I was hoping to draw from and evoke. And nostalgia is a powerful tool, but also taking that nostalgia and twisting it in a way, and sort of exploring how it can make you who you are, or using the story of an athlete to explore a deeper human truth.
So speaking of strange ways and twisting things, there is like an element of like supernatural or like oddness to some of these stories. Is that kind of who you are as a writer? Like that seeps in generally, or were you conscious of kind of writing those kinds of stories that are askew?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I appreciate you saying that. I think what I try to do, if anything, when I sit down to write, is surprise myself, because I think that's when you can have fun, or that's when things feel most real, because life is surprising. It's not linear. There's an oddness to our everyday lives. And I think that's what interests me, really, and just trying to find those little gaps, those cracks in space. And Yeah, I think just trying to create the feeling of the unexpected, even for myself. And I think if I start surprising myself, or not necessarily knowing where a story is going, that excites me, and I try to follow that thread.
How do you how do you start a story not knowing where it's going?
Yeah, great question. One thing I like to do is just write like 31st sentences. Like that's just an exercise if I'm feeling stuck, or if I feel like a piece isn't rounding into shape, or I'm abandoning a draft or whatever it is. It's a good way to sort of get back to the basics. It's like when you haven't been to the gym for a while, it's like, just started getting your butt on the treadmill and just jogging for 10 minutes. It's sort of that exercise. And so, I'll do that exercise, 31st sentences, and just sort of maybe pick the strangest one, or the one that feels like it has an ellipsis at the end of it, or a character that could lead me in an interesting place. And I think that's more fun. I think I don't know. A lot of writers, and rightfully so, outline and know exactly where their stories are, and I wish to some extent I was that way, but I think I have to just kind of follow the thread or see where something takes me. So yeah, I don't know. I wish I was more of an outliner, but I kind of have to not know in some ways.
So where it takes you, I mean, the journey can sometimes be short or sometimes it's a little longer. I noticed like there's varying lengths within this collection. And like, how do you know when a story kind of needs to wrap up?
Yeah, man, I think it's just it comes down to a feeling. Maybe there's a rhythm that you just find within the piece. I think sometimes it's difficult to even say or to know. I wish I knew. Honestly, I think you just have to trust your gut when it comes down to it. Like for example, I think the shortest piece in the collection is about Randy Johnson and the afternoon that he struck a bird, which is just completely unbelievable. I actually cannot believe that really happened on a baseball field. He struck a bird with a fastball, and the poor bird exploded on the field, and that's just like a blink, less than a second that happened. And so in that way, I guess the length of that particular piece mirrors that moment in time. So that's maybe a more linear example, but other pieces, I don't know. I guess they just the character demands a little bit longer of a leash to tease that story out. The last piece in the collection is called Man Up, and it's a novella, I suppose, maybe 60 or 70 pages, and that story I'm still building out. Actually, I'm trying to see if there's a novel length story to be told about that one. So yeah, I think for me, I just have to just feel the rhythm of the piece, and they sort of tell you where they need to go.
It sounds like even you're listening to your stories that something like Man Up maybe told you it wasn't done.
Yeah, you know, I wrote a novel that came out last year that centered music, which is another one of my passions and just loves. And so I was like, oh, I would love to write another book if I could. And what's my other, cultural love and that's sports. And so I had this sense that I would love to write a sports novel at some point. I didn't necessarily know it was going to be that uh, Man Up would be the seed of it. But I sense that character. His name is Jay Nichols, and he's a star college basketball player who finds himself in hot water and in the bright spotlight of Division I college basketball. And it's just a big world to explore. And it's something I know quite a bit about. My dad was a Division I college basketball coach for 30 years. So as I was growing up, so I was close to the sport, and saw the insides of it, and not from a player's perspective necessarily, but I know enough to know the authenticity of that world. And yeah, there's just so many elements to college basketball, from the youth of the athletes themselves to the money now with the NIL deals, to the agents, to the on court action, which is fun to write about. So yeah, I think it just was just the sense that there were a lot of dots to try to connect, and so maybe that's what led me to try to continue to flesh that out, and I'm continuing to do so.
The the coach waiting in the wings to get his moment, is that something that you saw?
Ah, not per se. I mean, I think that's just the nature of the beast, so to speak. In this case, not to spoil anything, it happens within the first couple sentences, but the coach of the program dies tragically on the court, has a heart attack, and as you mentioned, there's an assistant who sort of leaps at the opportunity to prove himself, and in reality or real life, there's always going to be the next man up. It's a harsh profession, whether it's college or professional sports. You're the numbers speak for themselves. There's a win column and a loss column, and if the loss column adds up, you're not going to stick around very long. And so, by nature, there is someone who's coming in to prove themselves. And every story needs an antagonist, and so that just felt like a ripe opportunity to have a villain, so to speak, someone who sort of has an antithetical frame of mind to the coach that passed away, who was sort of this player's coach, quote unquote, who was a kinder, gentler soul. And so here we have someone who's coming in who may not necessarily have his athlete's best interest in mind, or who just wants to prove himself and bolster his own reputation, his own ego. So it just felt like something that could certainly happen, but also was sort of fun to write about.
Yeah, it feels like there could almost be like parentheses next in front of "Man Up," the title of that story, right? Like the shadow of that lurking.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's very well put. I didn't even think of that, but I love that. And yeah, that's a great insight. And for me, it was sort of that double entendre of defensively, you got to man up. It's man on man. But then also this sort of underlying, the term is thrown around a lot, but toxic masculinity that can very easily bleed into all sports of all shapes, sizes, levels, amateur all the way up to professional. But especially in men's sports, there's this sort of kill or be killed mentality, and a lot of that is changing. But I think when you cut to the heart of it, I'm not sure if it really is. So that really interested me. I think there's a lot of talk and efforts made by the NBA, the major leagues, to sort of change that narrative and give more shine more of a spotlight on the mental health aspect of athletes, and sort of this at least on the men's side, the sort of masculinity of it all. And so that also was something I was interested in exploring, and sort of lend itself to that title.
Right, and it's also a young man wrestling with kind of maturation as well.
Yeah, and that was something that as I've gotten older, I'm in my early 40s now, but growing up, my dad's the kids that were on his teams, when I was 18 in college, I can't even imagine what it would have been like to be on a major program, and to have a university and fans' hopes and dreams riding on your shoulders. Like 18 is crazy. Or even like a guy like Cooper Flagg, who played for Duke last year, was 17 for most of the season, which is just unbelievable when you really think about it.
Mm-hmm.
So you're absolutely right. You have someone who's maturing in a fishbowl, so to speak.
With a story like that, there's some humor, there's some darkness and pathos. Like in terms of like establishing like a tone to a story, like does that just kind of come out in the wash, or do you approach things consciously about like kind of what tone you're looking to employ?
Man, great question. I suppose the answer is no. And again, I feel like I'm leaning on sort of a crutch of an answer, but it's just what the story tells me the tone will be. I think my sensibilities lean a little darker, probably. So I would say that I probably skew toward a little bit more of a darker sensibility, but hopefully always with a little bit of a sense of humor, and at least a crack of light at the end of the tunnel. I hope to never leave a reader completely in despair and hopeless. I don't think that really gets us anywhere. But yeah, I don't necessarily go in. I wish that I could go in and say, hey, I want to write a funny story, but I don't think that story would be very good. Or if I were to say I'm going to go write, I guess it's different if you're writing a genre piece. I would love to write more of a horror leaning novel someday, but I think at a certain point you have to kind of accept the kind of writer or person that you are.
It's interesting to see you say you'd be interested in doing horror, because I like genre wise, like you could see something like the title story turning very dark.
Mm, mm,
Right,
yeah,
like the premise of like a world, stopping and then like one person kind of adrift, right? Like they almost become a ghost in their own story.
yeah, yeah. I love that. That's a great phrase. Yeah, that piece again, I guess, was someone who was. It's called Hang Time, and it's sort of that. And I apologize for the. I don't know if you can hear those sirens out my window. The blessing and curse of living in New York. But yeah, hang time is sort of that in between. You said a parentheses earlier, and that's sort of that blip in the character's life where the game slows down so much for him that it actually stops, and he has the moment to sort of contemplate his future as a young man. He's a senior in high school, about to go to play ball in college. So he's exploring whether or not he actually loves this sport. If his relationship with his girlfriend will continue. This whole sort of his world has sort of collapsed in on itself in this brief moment of time on the basketball court. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, in a different world, that could be an extremely harrowing experience. And I could imagine if that were ever a film, you can imagine that becoming truly a horrific, you know, a traumatic event in someone's life. I mean, let alone the sort of space time continuum of it all. But yeah, I don't know. I think I was more interested in sort of this elegiac tone, where there's this sort of bittersweet uh, recognition on his end that this moment in his life is going to end and the next chapter will begin, and some of the things he loves, will be left behind, and maybe there are new doors to open. So yeah.
Is there a specific reason that's the title story that you chose Hang Time to call this collection?
A few different titles kind of popped in my head. I'll credit Scott with 406 Press for talking me out of calling it Jock Jams, which I thought was clever. But he was like, no, I think these stories deserve, not necessarily a more serious title, but we shouldn't be so tongue in cheek. And I think he was absolutely right. So thank you, Scott. But yeah, I think Hang Time made a lot of sense, beyond just being the title of one of the stories, but again, like sort of encapsulating that in betweenness, that precipice or the threshold, as you're leaving a chapter of life and entering a new one, or the moment right before something big is about to happen, whether that's the dissolution of a relationship, or the end of a season, or the moment right before coming out of a timeout, before, with a few seconds left on the clock and the coach has just drawn up a play and the ball's coming to you, like that sort of that moment when life hangs in the balance, and it doesn't necessarily need to be the biggest moment of our lives. In fact, I think a lot of the most interesting things in our lives, every moment is sort of hang time if you're able to live in the present. But it could be something as simple as uh, you're waiting for your partner to come home from work and you have something to tell them, or it could be the moment where you lose someone you love. So it could be the big or the small. It's just those in between moments that I think are really interesting.
Jock Jams, if you had more stories like Headhunter about like the walk up music, I think like the intersection of music and sport, you could have a collection of Jock Jams, right? Like if you had a bunch of stories like that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I love that. Yeah, you should take that and run with it. I think that's fantastic. I mean, that's a question that, like, you're at a bar with your buddies. That's a question I feel like that will come up every so often. Like, hey, if you had a chance to pick your walk up music, what would it be? So that's a fun exercise, and I feel like, yeah, even just a collection or like a little yeah, series of stories based on different characters' walk up music would be awesome. I
So,
love that.
so does the choice in Headhunter come out of like trying to come up with like the most outrageous walk up song then?
Uh, no, I think I was just, Judy Sill. I love just as an artist, and I think I was just in a heavy Judy Sill phase when I wrote that, so I wasn't necessarily trying to be cute with that selection, and also, like, that story deals a lot with insomnia, at least on the subtext, and that's something that I've struggled with at various points in my life, and it really is not fun. And so I don't know, it was just sort of came out in like this sort of surreal exploration of sort of transmuting that insomniac sort of dream space into the moment of a batter walking up to face this pitcher who almost like a Dave Stewart, if you remember from the Oakland Athletics
Of
back in the
course,
day, would
yeah.
stare down batters over the lip of his glove, and like sort of had that like menacing glare, and stepping into the box to face a guy like that, or a Nolan Ryan or something, who, a pitcher who means you ill will, if not in just striking you out, then, maybe even going for your head. And so, yeah, there's a few different things going on in that story, and I'm not even sure I can really articulate it beyond just, again, just sort of following that sort of gut, um, you know, sort of that thread, I guess. But yeah, the Judy Sill, I love that song. I love both of her studio records, and I don't know, if nothing else, if someone out there has not heard of Judy Sill, or heard her music, maybe that story will be a cue to give it a listen.
Put it on a playlist. Hearing you say, you wrestle with insomnia, and then that was kind of like how you worked yourself into it. I am curious, like, because a lot of times when you're talking to a novelist, obviously there's kind of like a character who represents the author in some way. But within short stories, like, is there always some sort of like avatar for the author?
Yeah, great question as well. I mean, I think I'm certainly represented in all of them are some piece of me, I would say. But for example, in there's a weird story called Lock and Load that's about a bachelorette party that takes place at a like a, I don't even know what you call it, like a gun range in Miami, and almost like a theme park in a way, which is a place that I actually have seen, when I was down there for a job. And it just, I couldn't believe it. There's this like, spray painted panda with like a bandolier of bullets across his chest, and like, double handed guns. I was just like, wow, this is just outrageous. And so I was just inspired to write that story. I'm not a woman. I've never been to a bachelorette party. But, I guess a part of me is in that story, in the sense that, what would it be like to be at this sort of celebratory event at sort of this weird dystopian, like, you know, gun range slash theme park. I don't know. It was just such a bizarre place that I felt compelled to write about it, and there's a story about a couple guys who surf, and I've tried to surf a couple times. I can't pretend to be a surfer. I have friends that surf. So in all of them, I think an element of, I don't think if you're a writer, you can't help but inject um, some of yourself into the stories that you write, whether it's a novel or a short story. But I think the characters take on a life of their own, and you have to try to meet them halfway, I suppose.
For sure. It sounds like, I mean, even if there's not a one-to-one character, it sounds like at least everything is ripped from your mind, so it is inescapably yours.
Yeah, very well put. Absolutely.
Well, Hang Time out through 406 Press right now. Brendan, thanks very much for joining me on the program. Congrats on the release of the collection.
Thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate it. It was awesome talking to you.